Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is January 24th, 2014, and I'm here today with Professors Ray Berry and Joe Mattys. Ray, why don't you start and tell us how and when you came to Randolph-Macon College?
Well, I started teaching here in 1982. Actually, I taught in the summer school in 1982, before the regular semester began, and my situation was interesting because I was part of the Artist in Residence program. I wasn't a real faculty person. I held a position, did the same teaching load, but was paid way less than anybody else, which was saying something. Basically, my program was that I had to have an exhibition. I taught all of the studio classes except for a couple of adjunct ones, and essentially it was a one-year position with the possibility, if you didn't offend too many people, that they might invite you back for a second year. And I taught for a couple of years, and by some sort of, they decided to end the program, to actually destroy the Artist in Residence program and turn it into a full-time faculty line. Ostensibly because I was so magnificent that they knew they would never get anybody better than me, and therefore they would just, give me a full-time slot. It wasn't a tenure track first, I don't believe. Not that I recall. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But it was a different situation, and my pay went up, and I was basically made an instructor instead of the Artist in Residence program.
And who were some of the faculty in the department at the time?
Actually, John Longacre was the chair, and Buster Ward was music, and Pete Kilgore was theater, and we had and Jack Witt taught a drawing class, and that's pretty much who we were. Yeah. Oh, and Gordon Brock was the choir, of course. Yeah.
I've heard so many stories of people who've come for 1-year appointments or sabbatical replacements, and their career at Randolph-Macon spanned many years. Would Joe tell us how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon?
It was in 1990, and I had been teaching at the University of Virginia, where I was director of theater. It was a large department, about a dozen people in that department. But I wasn't sure that my future was going to be at the University of Virginia. It's a big department, prestigious university, but they're very selective about, shall we say, who they tenure. And I didn't really think that I had the kind of reputation that was going to get me tenure readily there. It would be quite a battle. And my wife and I wanted to look for an opportunity where we could both teach again. She teaches also. And so this opening came up, and it was at a small liberal arts college, which was really where I cut my teeth both as an undergraduate and then in my first teaching job. So this one looked very attractive. Plus, there was the hint at the time that they would be expanding the department. As Ray said, Pete Kilgore was here, but he was part-time because he was operating the Barksdale Dinner Theater just 5 miles east in Hanover Courthouse. And his wife's health was declining, so he was really wanting to kind of transition out. And so when I came in '90, it was a very, very congenial atmosphere, both the campus and the department. I interviewed with Ray and Buster Ward, Bruce Gladstone was in music at that time. So it was a small department, but it looked like we might be moving in the direction of moving from drama being one of the points of emphasis in an arts major. I mean, you could major in the fine arts with an emphasis in one of the three areas, and gradually we did indeed, form a drama major. So I got to add classes. It became a full-time position when I interviewed. It was going to be full-time, but it had been part-time. So it was very attractive for many reasons. It reminded me a lot of the atmosphere of my undergraduate school at Colorado College, but also the chance to keep doing the kinds of things I like to do with students having a lot of independence. So all in all, it was very attractive. And I remember when my first conversations, in fact, on campus was with Ray and his daughter, Rachel, now more popularly known as Pace. So I even had a short interview with Rachel, and apparently I passed that interview.
Yeah, that's nice because I remember one of the things is that, of course, Joe's situation when Pete was going to retire, he was a part-time situation, and Joe was going to be full-time. So that was a big deal for the department to my position had been sort of a interesting one, sort of novel within the academy, but was essentially turned into something that was full-time. And then Joe's hire was a pretty big deal because that meant we were really, I think, being a little more serious about the arts here. I think that was part of our thought, and I have special memories of that. Of course, I went to UVA and actually acted there, so I was kind of familiar. I knew Joe's chairman from my days when I was actually was teaching in the area, and then I was sort of corrupted into coming and acting at UVA. But I got to go see Joe act. That was part of the deal. Was I got to go up and see. Joe was in a repertory company during the summer, and I got to see one of the plays he was in, and I was really impressed by what a wonderful actor he was, and that meant a lot to me. I didn't care about all the rest of the stuff. I wanted to see him as an actor first, and I was really impressed by it. And then it turned out there were other great things about him because he could manage. He was such a great manager and was so good with details and was so good with the students. And it was really a nice introduction to Joe, and it just made it special that he had gone to UVA and was teaching up there. So it was, his coming to the department was a very big deal in terms of the kind of the fabric of the department back then. Yeah.
Well, you described the growth of the department just a little bit. Why don't you speak to that directly about how it was when you came, and then your position became full-time, and yours from part-time to full-time, and developing the majors. Just over the course of your time, talk about the curriculum growth and the department growth.
Well, for a while we had something called what was that 4-semester sequence called?
The Fine Arts major.
Yeah, but it was
Fine Arts.
It was kind of a colloquium. We had 4 semesters.
Yeah.
All majors went through these 4 semesters, and nominally each semester was devoted to a particular period in history, and it was always team taught. So Ray and I were there with Buster, and sometimes in another semester somebody else would rotate in or rotate out. And it was really kind of wonderful because that was one of my impressions about the department. One of its continuing strengths, I think, has been the sense that we all know a little bit about the other fields. Pardon me. My own undergraduate major also depended upon knowledge of art history and music history as well as drama, and that's really very much the way the department was set up here. And so I got to, corrupt young minds with Ray, talking about the history and the theory of these various periods. Now, that particular element eventually became kind of cumbersome because a student had to recognize by the end of the sophomore year that that's what they wanted to do, and so they were locked into a 4-semester sequence that nominally was supposed to kick in at the beginning of their junior year, and some didn't decide whether they were going to be an arts major, so they were eventually became too hard to maintain, and we cycled it out. But in the meantime, Ray and I got to do a lot of interesting things with him. It eventually morphed into something called the Senior Arts Seminar, but we've always had a great atmosphere in the department that I think is very much due to Ray. He's said some nice things. Now it's my turn to talk about the way the department operated, because when I first arrived, Buster was chair for another maybe 3-4 years or so, but then Ray became chair. And it was just a great atmosphere because we all, as I said, we all knew something about the other fields. Buster knew a little bit about theater, and Ray knew a little bit about theater, and I had taken some art history and some music history, and but there was a great sense of collaboration that made us, I think, stronger, and also we got to talk to each other in front of our students and take questions from them. It was just a wonderful atmosphere that I haven't seen anyplace else.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, when I first came here, we didn't have majors.
In the arts department or at all?
No, we didn't have majors in the arts department.
It was just an fine arts major.
That's right. You had sort of a general, almost. It wasn't as bad as saying it was an art appreciation degree. It wasn't that terrible, but it was a little more generic. And then, sort of after I sort of left the line of the artists in residence, and we started to get a little firmer, and we came up with this sort of fine arts history where we did a chronological, the 2 semesters, and that sort of became a fine arts major with an emphasis in music or drama or something like that. And I must say, it definitely had its ups and downs, and we had weak parts and that kind of thing, but knowing, hearing our alums talk about it, the ones that went through it, it worked well. I mean, it was stunning how people would say, "Oh, I learned all this music that I would have never learned, and all this art history and this, that, and the other." And the students were very collaborative. They had to really work together, and they became this kind of cohesive unit because they went through these 4 semesters. And they got a pretty damn good education, and they were very appreciative of it, because when they went out into the world, and quite a few of them, ended up teaching and things like that, they went, "Boy, I know so much more than my cohorts and other things." It was really kind of interesting. One of the reasons it sort of dissolved, besides its sort of, its misshapen character, probably. Our own unevenness, was that it became difficult, and it's kind of a curious thing. It's a negative in terms of how the academy sees things. We'd have students that would, very, very good students who had excellent GPAs and wanted to go to graduate school, and they would apply to graduate school, and they'd look at the records and say, "What is this? Have you not studied Renaissance art history?" "Yes, I have." "Well, you don't have a course in Renaissance art history." And a lot of graduate schools found it difficult to look and find comparable coursework, which was a little difficult. That we had created this thing that worked, I think, very nicely and gave kids a great education, but it didn't translate as well if they wanted to go further. And we went, well, maybe we need to evolve, because the system that we were in kind of required it. And it also may have solved. I mean, we had a new Evie Toronto was teaching, and Beth Fisher had come in at a certain time, and she was being shared with the classics, and she was doing ancient art history and that sort of thing. So there was more of a call for more specific courses, and the business of, like Joe said, we had, the kids had to get in on the 4 semesters in order to make it work, and that was just really quite difficult, just logistically. So we sort of fell back into a more traditional way of, having the classes and the majors and things like that, and to back it up. But, something was lost. I really do. I must say there was sort of a group grope there that we all did that was really, really, when it was good, it was really good.
Yeah. And it was great, too, that, as you say, I mean, drama concentration people had to learn about music and art, which is indispensable to them anyway. I mean, it has been preserved in the sense that today a person majoring in one of our discrete fields still has to take at least a course in one of the other areas. A drama major still has to take either a studio art course or an art history or a music history course. To me, it's indispensable for a director. But I think that's its great benefit was that you had to have those other things. You couldn't do without them. You couldn't get out without them. But it really did make for a kind of sense that I think is very much in that liberal arts tradition. That is, everything connects. You can't really just sort of parcel it out. I also remember one thing that we did do one year when we did a staged reading of Art, a play by Yasmin Reza. That's just, it's all about exactly what we study. It's a play. It's about painting. Music was kind of neglected, but Ray and I did a couple of the roles, and it's just this wonderful, rich kind of experience. Sigh is not there today. I think it was a good era. It was a good era.
It was, and I think we had a lot of collaboration.
Yeah.
That helped us individually as faculty. We got to know each other better, and it was nice. Those were the 80s and early 90s were good times in that respect. Yeah.
Good. Well, that sounds very good. Now, we could segue into other curriculum issues, or we could, I'm thinking specifically about the more recent years with the FYE, if you'd like to talk about that, because that sort of touches on the interdisciplinary trend. So,
well, I think we should also talk about the buildings, Lynda, that we
that
had,
first.
because when I arrived, both what is now known as Pace Armistead and Old Chapel were wrecks. They
were falling
just
down.
awful. I mean, one of the first times I
Absolutely.
came to visit Ray in Pace Hall, there were a couple of okay areas. They were very unique spaces, and they were really very artistic and like little miniature lofts within this building. But if you went up to the second floor, it was literally a condemned area with dead pigeon skeletons, and
Yeah.
it was
no heat, no electricity.
You were not legally, I think, allowed to go there.
No.
But one year I sort of begged and commissioned Ray to paint a scenic drop for us for one of our shows, and he just laid it out on the floor up there and doing this beautiful, painting of leaves and drops and everything. But Old Chapel was not much better. Parts of it, there was an annex that had been put on, I think, in the 20s, that for a long time housed single male faculty members. They had little bedroom apartments on the second floor, and downstairs was a kitchen and a commons area, dining room, and stuff that, by the time I arrived, had been converted into offices and a classroom or two. But because of the geography and the climate of ash and everything, and the fact that it was right above an active steam line, the floors in that building, in that annex especially, would often buckle up, and at one point in a neighboring office to mine, the floors actually collapsed. So we, at the time I arrived, and I think Ray had been working under these circumstances for years, we had just these buildings were just in absolute ruins.
Yeah. Engineers were afraid to go in them.
It wasn't even
they couldn't be in them.
No, actually, we were in them, and we had no business being in them.
Right.
I mean, we were told, I remember.
Well, yours was worse than mine. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I think in some respects mine was.
Mine might have not been condemned yet.
Well, I remember sitting on the, one of the engineers or one of the fellows who came over to me and when they were doing the plans for Pace, renovation of Pace, and he said, "Ray, we've been through this," and he says, it's a good thing that we're doing this, because he said, I really think that, it could just, some parts of this could just have fallen down on you. And that was a building that was where they used more materials than they needed to construct it. I mean, there was a 60-foot beam in there that you couldn't mill in this country now. You'd have to go to Canada to get one comparable. But those were the kind of things that were sort of holding it up. Where on the other hand, I remember somebody at one point in time when the old chapel was they were seriously looking at, they were going to do something about it. And one of the engineers refused to go upstairs. He didn't want to even walk up there because he was afraid, the annex, he thought that was just ridiculous. He just said, I'm not even going to walk up there. Thank you very much, because it's a dangerous place. So we were really in a mess. I must say, I have the best story for renovation, though. Of course, all this cost money, and Pace Hall was just a disaster. And there was this point in time when Liddell Payne was out, doing what a president does and running out looking for money. And somebody had given him a call and said, listen, I understand that Bill Armistead is willing to give some money to the college. Well, Bill Armistead was this old curmudgeon, really conservative guy, and who never gave money to anything. And Liddell was thinking that he might get a few $1,000s from me. That would be great. And that would be a great victory if Bill Armistead coughed up a few $1,000s. So he did what he, hopped in his car and headed up to wherever he was and came in and said, and basically Bill was going to give $1 million to something. And Liddell almost passed out, and he wasn't thinking anything like that. And so he started, just sort of making up stuff as he went along that he could throw $1 million at. And he mentioned something like a professorship because Bill Armistead had some journalistic and some publishing expertise, and he thought maybe something like a professorship in journalism or something like that, or something to the English department, and he just poo-pooed it. Well, he was really much coarser than that. He just said, I'm not going to get any money to those bastards, And Liddell was running out of possibilities, and then he had this flash that I was sitting over in this building with the where the rats and the cockroaches were basically holding hands to keep it together, and he mentioned to Bill, he says, well, Pace Hall is in really bad shape, and Bill Armistead's eyes just lit up. He said, I was thrown out of school in Pace Hall.
Much of my glory days.
And Liddell just went, what? And Bill Armistead launched on this wonderful story where he said, yeah, he says, I have really fond memories of Pace Hall because somewhere along the line, the administration of the college, when Bill Armistead did the newspaper. I think he was the editor of the Yellow Jacket. And somewhere along the line, the administration had canceled a dance, much to the chagrin of the student body. And Bill Armistead had written a scathing editorial which he put in the paper, castigating various administrators, and they were pretty upset about that. So whoever was doing the head castigating office was my office in Pace Hall, and Bill was brought in and bitched at for writing this editorial, and he says, okay, we're suspending you from you don't have to you're suspended for classes for the rest of the week or something like that. Well, the irony was that Bill had just married a local girl. He had just gotten married, and essentially the college was telling him to go continue his honeymoon, go have fun with your new wife, which he thought was just fine. He really was okay with missing class and being thrown out of school. And So he had this wonderful memory of this time, which he later told me, standing in my offices, Ray, this is where it happened, and so he and his wife were very happy to give $1 million to Pace Hall. And I always said, now that's the kind of thing that the arts should support. Your sort of scurrilous activity and creative thinking, and here you are, you're going to give your money to this studio arts building where that's what we try to do. And he was really, really pleased with that. And so that was how we got the bulk of the money to redo Pace.
That's great.
Can't beat that.
Because at that time, in Bale's time, it would have been a chemistry building.
It was a chemistry building, but they also had some administrative offices, and I think there was even somebody in sociology or something like that had one of the offices. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the fate of departments is often tied to presidents. When I first came to Old Chapel, the theater was over there at that time, and it was a low-slung little place that you couldn't. There was not a lot of flexibility to it. We called it a black box, which means an enclosed space that's unlike a proscenium style theater, because you couldn't do anything else with it, and it was modeled very much on what Pete Kilgore had done over at Barksdale. And in fact, some of the seats had been salvaged not from Barksdale itself, but from another location, but it was configured like Barksdale, permanently affixed seats that were not suitable to that space. They were set at different angles and everything, and they were falling apart. So the first show I directed in 90, when the president was coming, to highlight the fact that the seats were not in very good shape, I made a reserved location for Liddell and Jean in a place where I knew the seats were bad. And indeed, he was sitting at an angle. My first visit here, in fact, in the spring of 91, interviewed, I went to see a show in a seat that fell through to the floor. Well, it wasn't very far, but the brackets were not good, and it became detached. So I always made sure that Liddell had a crooked seat when he came. Within a few years, we had funding for new chairs, flexible. It wasn't just due to him, but it did kind of highlight it. And Rusty Martin, who followed Liddell, of course, in the presidency, came through our building one day right after we'd had a particularly virulent outbreak of steam and water and everything else, and the floors where he was walking were literally pitched up like the Pyrenees, like mountains running down the center of this hallway. And I took him in and showed him where the floor had fallen through in Harry McInerney's office. The boards had literally rotted away, and there was only the fact that there were a couple of layers of carpet over it that kept somebody from falling through. And sure enough, another 3 or 4 years of Rusty Martin's tenure, and we not only had Pace, but we had renovations underway to Old Chapel that ensured that we got good classrooms out of that. And then we continued doing theater in Blackwell on the stage of what is now constitutes the Cobb Theater. And we continued to present unbroken, even though they were renovating the building at the time. So we were there in periods of when there was no electricity, when there was no running water, when there was no heat, when there was no air conditioning. We had temporary offices in the bathrooms upstairs in Old Chapel, in Blackwell, and we taught classes in the lobby while we were doing productions on the stage, transforming the stage of Blackwell Auditorium into what is now the Cobb Theater. So those were some kind of interesting pioneering days when we were making the transition.
Yeah, it was. Of course, art departments and things like that studio always gets the leavings. When they abandon a building, they say, "Well, we'll give it to the studio people."
Yeah.
And we're sort of been used to that. I mean, there was some, the renovation of the building was wonderful for me in terms of the fact that it wasn't going to fall down. But I also lost space because we had to, since it was renovation, we needed elevators, we needed strange things like bathrooms. which took up huge amounts of space in the floor plan. So the footprint may have looked the same, but it was really quite different. So where I would have these great, wonderful studios that had been big lab spaces and things like that, they were really redesigned into classrooms, which had to become studios again. So there was some loss there, and which we've worked around. It's not exactly ideal, and we made some gains. We put in an art gallery and that sort of thing. But well, we were working with old material, but in another sense too, we got to keep really a beautiful, handsome building. Because we kept the same ceiling heights. We maintained. We were able to keep a lot of the original glass, a lot of the wainscoting and things like that. It was nice. So I trust me, I've had people come in from other institutions and just say, "Oh, this is such a great building to have studio art, and the light is so amazing," which it is. It's really beautiful. Of course, a lot of art today. They don't even care whether they have natural light, but fortunately I do. So we make good use of it. But it's yeah, for a while there we were pretty primitive. It's amazing. There was a light board that I swear came from the Civil War that was in the theater for years, and oh my gosh, I don't know how some of the lighting was accomplished without blowing up everything.
Oh, it was. I think legally it was a fire hazard. I mean, because it was just basically a bunch of, quad boxes where you plugged in the plugs running from the instruments, and the heat that was generated in that space was amazing. And the other interesting story about that, of course, is I think your floors are the same way. There were 4 steel posts in the first floor of Old Chapel that held up the second floor roof, and they were permanently there. We had to work around them whenever we staged theater there, and the conventional way was just to put them at the corners of the stage and do plays sort of in the round. Well, when it came time to renovate the building, I asked about that. I said, what are we going to do about those? He said, well, we can take them down and we can put in steel I-beams across the whole width of the building, but that will more than double the cost of the renovation. So they didn't do it. They kept them, and the result is that they kept the steel beams and they simply buried them in the walls of the new rooms. You could still see four little posts in one of the rooms there, Old Chapel 114, I think. And the floors upstairs still pitch. If you drop a marble at the edge, it's going to roll like 60 to the center of the room. And so the floors still have this gentle, gracious sway, but it's still standing. It would be costly and impossible in your case, I guess, prohibitive in any case to try to change that out. So, so old buildings have, refreshing facelifts, but they can't disguise all of the original features, which is probably a good thing.
No, I think it is too. I don't think there's not a straight line in pace. Probably,
Right.
There's always a little bit of a sag or a curl or something, and that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's 3 buildings, Hayes and Old Chapel and Wash Wright, do make a beautiful
They do.
setting
Yeah.
for the old campus.
Right.
We're very nicely done. So when they renovated it, you still continue to have theater in Old Chapel, and then you moved to Black.
No, almost immediately, because again, Armistead was a leading gift to the renovation of Old Chapel, and I think his concern that I heard voiced was he wanted to see his money going before he passed away. So the plan had been originally to renovate Blackwell and turn that into a theatrical space while we continued to occupy Old Chapel. But because of Bill Armistead's desire, he wanted to see his money go to work right away in Old Chapel. So they started there first, which meant that the theater was not going to be ready in Blackwell. But we said, okay, so shut down all operations in Old Chapel. Classrooms, offices, everything went completely out of there, and that's how we got housed over in Blackwell. So we had 2 music guys and 2 theater guys who wound up with offices
In the bathroom.
in the bathrooms and in the old projection booth that was so hot that wax candles would literally just kind of tip over and melt. And so we continued to operate even while renovations were going on to both buildings simultaneously. But I didn't want to interrupt the theater program, so as I said, we had construction dust, paint overspray, points without utilities. But we continued to operate and to teach under those circumstances. So it was, it was a great statement about the arts soldiering on.
We just managed. We just pushed right through.
Well, since you brought up teaching, I do want to state for the record that both of you have been awarded teaching awards at the college, and Joe was awarded the Samuel Nelson Gray Distinguished Professor Award in 2009, and Ray was awarded the Thomas Branch Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2011. So if you want to talk about any stories about teaching.
And 2000.
Ray's run it twice.
And 2000. Okay, thank you. If you'd like to talk about your teaching experiences, student stories, or anything about teaching that you'd like to discuss?
Well, I don't know whether I want to even talk about my teaching because I'm not sure what I would. It's just too big a lumpy subject to talk about. I think one of the things that's important that I would state, and it has to do with actually something that we said earlier, we were talking about earlier in terms of the fine arts history and teaching. I mean, one of the things that's important about, one of the things I respect about Randolph-Macon, when I came as artist in residence, I was really, they just said, do what you're going to do. You know, we don't know what the hell you're going to do, but just do it. And I had, I looked around. I've had an interesting education in my life. I went to, my father was a scientist, and I've done all sorts of things. And I wanted to sort of honor what I considered the liberal arts and what artists should be doing, because artists should have a really excellent education. And I was really free to design and to come up with my ideas for, what should be done in studio and some other things. And I sort of created classes just for Randolph-Macon students, and I really tried to cater to concoct things that would work in this environment. And I was free to do that. I think I had enough prowess and enough moxie to push certain things. The students seemed to like what I did, and so I kind of got away with it. And I think it's important because I've seen it in other aspects of the college where some very creative, interesting kind of not traditional teaching went on, and I was allowed to do certain things that I think have ended up being very successful, and they've changed over the years as the student body has changed. I mean, one of my probably the most important class I taught in terms of the overall liberal arts idea was this class called Artistic Problems, which became kind of famous right away, probably because of the kind of students that took it and a lot of the energy and very open-ended kind of aspects of the class. And it's evolved. It's still being taught, although I don't teach it much right now, and it's evolved into an honors class called Zen and Creativity. But I guess the bottom line is that the more interesting creative things that I wanted to do, I was really allowed to do. And if they didn't work, if I didn't think they worked, I stopped doing them. And if they worked, I continued doing them. And I think that's one of the important aspects of this college is that if you did something that was creative and interesting and it worked, you were encouraged to do that. And I know when I was chair, when I had a little more oversight in the department, it was one of the things I wanted people to do. I had this idea that if somebody like Joe came in and said, I want to do this, I really didn't have to know what it was. That my answer would be, yes, I'll support that, because I respected those people, and if they had ideas that they wanted to do, I was going to back it. And just like when I had my ideas about what I wanted to do in terms of teaching, that the college basically said, okay, we're not real sure what it is you're saying, but if you believe it, let's go for it. And I think that's, for the most part, has been part of my experience at the college. I think that's not true everywhere in the institution, but I think that certainly in the arts we've been very good about allowing a kind of freedom and responsibility that goes with it within the department, and I think that's reflected in their teaching. I think that when I look at what we do, I think one of the first things I notice is that we have a lot of good teaching here. We've had, I think that's one of the benefits. Whether the students really recognize it or not is another thing. Sometimes they don't know, they don't really get it till they leave and are out for a while, and they go back and go, that was really good. Sometimes those things are kind of transparent. They don't make themselves apparent for a long time. But.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe pick up on that notion. That is, we had a drama reunion last spring, and it was great to see some of the students that I hadn't heard from in years. But a thing that I think I picked up on was that they really liked the atmosphere here. Very few of them could really talk about anything, substantive that they learned, but it was the opportunity to grow and to do things. And I came from an institution where that was kind of part of the philosophy, almost accidentally. Our one-man department left for a sabbatical. There was nobody really at the helm, so we formed a student theater group that did productions in his absence. And I'd always liked that idea. When I came here, there was this open door about designing a major that could include that. So all our drama majors do, and it happens really in studio too, and now also in music, they do their own thing. There's a senior project, and most of them choose to direct, and some of them design, a few write. But what has struck me is the fact that years later, that kind of opportunity kind of comes back up, and they recognize that they were able to do things here that they probably couldn't have done someplace else. And I hope they will always be able to do in the future as we our examination of what it means to be a liberal arts college is kind of bubbling just below the surface, and where we stand institutionally in the future is a question that everybody's kind of gingerly dealing with. But to see those students come back and say, I had so many opportunities here, and I feel that is more important about what we do than really kind of, do you know when Shakespeare was born? Well, it's kind of important that you have an idea about that, because you need to understand the times in which he lived and the relationships, and so you should have a good sense of that, because that's going to impact how you work, and what was the music like, what was the art like, and so this atmosphere which Ray really nurtured in his years as chair. I think it's always been our our departmental philosophy. So it's watching students pop back up and, do things, and sometimes they say thanks. Sometimes you just look at them and you feel thanked because you can see what they're doing. That's what I really enjoy.
I must say I always feel like I had a great educative experience because I've sort of belonged to an academic family, and I grew up around the University of Virginia, and I went there, and I've done so many things. I was a scientist for a while, and I taught science in elementary school, 6th grade science teacher, and also there are all sorts of things, and I think I have a very interesting and rich idea about what the liberal arts are. And I must say I feel a certain pride and ownership that we in the arts have about how we do things that is very, very much like the best of the liberal arts. We are the liberal arts in many ways. How we do our work, how we prepare, we make things, we do things. We never do anything in isolation. We do things in response to other things. We wear several hats. We know something about science. We know something about math. We know a great deal about history. We know a great deal about literature. We are so complete as individuals. When I look around at the college, or I sit at a faculty meeting and I see various aspects of the college demonstrating to me that they probably needed a little more time in the arts to be informed, because they've crawled into a tunnel in their own field, which is often untouched by what we really call the liberal arts, and it's one of our weaker aspects. When I look at the population of the college, and I can just trip over to the sciences or to the English department and stuff like that, I can say, you need to do a few more things. You need to get dirty a little bit. You need to bang around and be a little more appreciative of certain things that we do as a matter of course, because I think we're really epitomize what the liberal arts can do. We have to stay fresh. We have to be. There are a lot of things that we do that are really about the liberal arts. I think we live it and breathe it. And I wish that more of the faculty and student body had more reason to be in a play, or to listen to a concert, or to understand what drawing can give you. I think it has. I think there are life lessons there, and the fact that we are at least given some sort of credibility in the college now is part of a battle that Joe and I fought for many years, to be not just to be appreciated, but to really be respected, and to have an opinion. That our opinion is valued a little more than it used to be when I first came here. That we weren't, the arts really aren't serious. That's what you do after all the serious stuff is done. Is a lie. It's a myth. It's a very serious error on various people's parts to think that we're the icing on the cake when everything else important is done, and that's not true. At all, and I think maybe it's a continuous battle that we fight, but it's part of our legacy, actually.
Well, speaking of I'm going to just pull this back if you want to talk about
Sure.
it. The interdisciplinary aspect, what you were talking about, people in certain departments needing to connect with the arts. I think some of that interconnection was the goal of the FYE, to have faculty of disparate disciplines work together to create something new that the students could begin to make connections between psychology and theater in
Right.
your case, or English and math, or that kind of thing. So could we speak about the FYE at some point? That we're not to belabor it, but
Sure.
as a goal, we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, maybe we'll talk about the FYE. Okay, before our break, we were talking briefly about interdisciplinary approach to the curriculum, and specifically the FYE. And Joe, since you've had a leadership role in that, I wondered if you'd talk
Right.
about a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I taught in the very, 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 very first version of it, which was a 3-person experiment with Beth Gill and Elsa Falls in biology. And we each took 12 students for a 6-week period. And so Beth had 12, I had 12, and Elsa had 12, and we rotated them around till they came to each of us in the course of a year, and then they did a final project. And it was very, very difficult. Math was a component, and English was a component, in addition to what they were taking with us. We trimmed that down a little bit, and it evolved then over another couple of years before we went to a full implementation. And I think that the theory was always wonderful. The notion that knowledge doesn't come in discrete packets. It's not like you should, as I think Ray was suggesting, you don't just burrow into a little tunnel and stay there. But education, the liberal arts in its best sense, recognizes that all of the stuff is really kind of interconnected, and that what you really are learning here is how to think and analyze and write and speak, and that the awareness of how 2 different fields see the same subject matter can be illuminating for a student. And so I've always been a big fan of it. As I said, I taught in that very first one, and then I've taught 6 more. I'm in my 6th one now, my 6th edition. And most of those have been with Kristen Claren in psychology. It was her inspiration. She said, the nature of identity is really kind of fascinating to those of us who are in psychology, how we come to be who we are, and it's very much like taking on a role, because her family had done some theater, and so it's always been a wonderful fit for us, and I think a particularly fruitful one, a kind of natural and easy one. So I've greatly enjoyed it. This will be my last year of teaching, and my last year of teaching that course. So I've looked on it with great fondness, and directing the program has also been challenging. It's now changing. It's going to be a completely different kind of animal. It being our students' first significant experience with college, the one that kind of ties them all together, as we look at a new program called the RMCS 101, Randolph-Macon Colloquium and Seminar. And it's got a different approach, but that same idea that there's some very focused experiences that we can give to students in terms of our relationship with them as advisors, and really presenting a subject, and some overlapping stuff that shows how fields connect. So I think the college still perceives that, but the form of it, it's a different animal with some of the same principles. But I want to have Ray talk about his with environmental studies, because you had 2 with environmental studies.
Yeah, I work with Mike Fenster, and a part of, one of the things that, I think there's a great commonality, for instance, between the arts, the studio arts, and sciences. Them scientists that have laboratories, that do work, that go outside, that experiment. Artists do that. We were in the same guild in the Renaissance. There's great commonality between especially the biological sciences, because they have to do things. They have to go out and look at facts. And artists that's really our grounding. As we look at the world, we want to figure out what the hell's going on. Now we don't, and our experiments have to do with materials and creating imagery and following certain concepts. We follow a different kind of rules system, but we have great commonality in how we approach things. We are investigators together, and I really liked working with Mike. He and I had a good bond, and I was sort of serving, and our first initial one was we were working on the dynamics of the Barrier Islands off of Virginia, and I was really, I got to be a sixth grade science teacher a little bit and a landscape painter, and kind of really teach scrupulous observation in terms of 19th century how naturalists were. All naturalists, they all could draw. They had beautiful sketchbooks where they had to truly observe. And having grown up as a scientist, with a scientist as a father, the business of being a supreme observer is huge. It's still huge, not taught very much or not emphasized as much in the sciences as I'd like to see it. But it was an opportunity for me to have that other kind of emphasis with kids, combined with Mike is a great colleague. I joke with him that I want a Mike Fenster action figure that I can. That what I can do is I can be out in the landscape working, and I can just pop my Mike Fenster action figure next to me, push the button, and he'll tell me everything I need to know about where I'm standing on the Earth. And it's kind of remarkable because he has his PhD in geology, and he knows everything. And as it turns out, there are all these very subtle things that I've actually been dealing with for years that are connected, that are geological, and which is kind of wonderful to hear it from his standpoint of view. And he'll look at one of my paintings and say, "Ray, you see this line here in the rocks that you've done? That's a Jurassic line." And I go, "Oh yeah, really?" And then it goes up this way to Doswell, where all the thousands and thousands of ancient whales lived in this specific area that's now being it's part of a quarry. And there are all these things that are kind of wonderful and fascinating, and we explored all those things. We get to touch on those things with students, and it was really very exciting. It was I got more out of it than the students did. And that's actually not true. I think the students got a great deal out of us, and the fact that we really went to those places and did things. I mean, when you're out in the Barrier Islands, you're not in Kansas anymore, and you have a different kind of appreciation. The act of doing something, of being there, is huge in the arts, and it's huge in most of the sciences, and that's important, and part of the reasons why I think ever since I've been here, I've had good relationships with the scientists, because they sort of recognize, and I can speak their language reasonably well anyway. It makes for good companionship and I think good teaching experiences. But the second iteration that we worked on the James River, that was interesting too. But I think the FYC and its new iteration is an interesting idea. I think it's very dependent on the individuals that teach it, and their commitment to making it an honest effort and an open effort, and that's always going to be where the tricky parts lie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, something you said earlier when you were talking about your artistic problems course and how it has evolved, and it's now Zen and creativity.
Well, there's still an artistic problems class. Actually, Dwayne Kaiser is teaching it right now, or taught it last semester. I'm sorry, and that was a big gift to him because he was in it as a student many, many years ago, and it was an exciting time. But one of the things that has happened over the years is that some of the aspects of that class, there were sort of, I for many years, for 30 years, I wore another hat at the college, which was I taught Shotokan karate here, and this is a very traditional form of martial arts, which is actually, rigorously connected to Waseda University in Japan and Caltech in California and all sorts of places where we have a commonality of a single teacher. And so I had this kind of crazy, very traditional Japanese thing that was going on every Tuesday and Thursday night in the old gymnasium for 30 years, plus 20 years of East Coast, what we call special training, or gashuko, where people from the students of Master Oshima who are on the East Coast, sometimes from Canada, sometimes the West Coast, come and spend an intensive training during a weekend, a Friday, Saturday, where we sleep on the floor and we practice all through the weekend, numerous practices with incredible kind of training. That's been part of Randolph-Macon College, sort of underneath the blanket. Not many people know about it, except the coaches and some students who are suffering through it. But part of it was also to introduce a Zen discipline, which was something I introduced a little bit in artistic problems, and then later has evolved into classes where we actually meditate, we sit zazen, and I tried to use zazen as a tool, as an instrument for a creative, vital person to have in their repertoire, in their tool case, that they know how to discipline themselves, to focus their energy, to calm their minds, and to push away things that are distractions. These are always a difficulty for artists. Artists and creative people are always distracted and sometimes misuse distractions in all sorts of very negative ways. And I believe, because I'm an example of it, that a Zen discipline is a very, very powerful and useful element in the creative life. And so it's one of the things that I have developed over my time here. That students who want to try it can try it. It's not something. It's just not I call it cocktail party Zen, where you do a little meditating for 20 minutes and somehow you think you've got it. This is really hard work. It requires a lot of discipline and a lot of time and a lot of patience. And I want to give them a good introduction so that, later on in life they know how they can maybe go about it or really introduce it into their life a little better. So that's kind of how I go about that. But actually this past December, which was my 30th, when special training ended for the East Coast, which I've led most of the time, I decided that was it, that I was going to retire from that aspect of teaching. I wasn't going to lead a dojo. Quite frankly, students now are not interested in training as hard as they need to train to be with me. So I don't do it anymore. I'm not going to lower my standards for kids who just want to, come in and treat it like a gym class. So I don't do it anymore. I have my own practice, and I have people on the East Coast that invite me to go to places and teach and stuff like that, and that's fine. But I don't. It's really not part of my scheme here now. I'm definitely into geezerhood, and I want to teach painting and drawing and other things, and I'll probably have a class that will involve some sort of meditative practice, but I'm not going to. My martial arts days for teaching Randolph-Macon students are over. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Well, I'd like to take maybe a step back from and see the bigger picture as you reflect back on your time at Randolph-Macon. If there are any particularly satisfying experiences that come to mind, or funny anecdotes, or just any memorable stories you'd like to share.
Well, I think it should go back to Ray, because you were talking about students and their impact on us, and I think it's really kind of an interesting signal that one of your students, Dwayne Kaiser, is accomplished in his own right, and is back here teaching. And I don't know. I'll introduce it if you are prepared to talk about it, because Dwayne took Ray to Spain. This was sort of a big special deal, but I think you should talk about that.
Yeah, that's, we always look at our best, our students that have succeeded and say, well, yeah, I taught him everything he knows or some crap like that, and that's a big lie. Dwayne was an extraordinary student when he was here, and he was a super talented guy, and he went off and, at my behest, and went to Brooklyn College and just, has had an amazing career as an artist and is internationally known. He's really done very, very well. And he's teaching. He's been teaching here for a number of years as an adjunct, and he's been very successful and very valuable. And it was interesting, when I turned 60, we were having my 60th birthday party. I had he and his wife and John Vanderside and his wife. John Vanderside is one of my old students here, and was also both of these two guys. Unfortunately, also were my karate students, so they've never been able to escape me. And Dwayne, the poor guy, so if they didn't have me in the studio, they had me in the gym. So, but during this time, we had dinner at my house, and we were having just sort of nice thing and just conversation. I wanted to have these two, my old favorite students, with me on my 60th birthday. And Dwayne said, "Oh, this is kind of nice. He says, by the way, I've decided I'm going to give you a present." And I said, "Oh, you didn't need to do that." And he says, "Well, I remember it was very important to me that when you were teaching, one of the things you talked about was how you were working in Europe, actually. I was working in Luxembourg in the 70s. And I'd taken a trip to Madrid, and I'd gone to the Prado, and one of the most important things I'd ever seen was Velázquez La Meninas, which is probably the best painting that was ever done, at least in this universe. And it was very important to me, and he remembered it, and he got to be attracted. He says, "But I've never seen it. I've never stood in front of it." And you always said anybody who's an artist should stand in front of that painting. And he said, I want you and me to go and stand together in front of that painting." So he said, "We're going to go. You let me know when you can do it." But he says, "Let's go to Madrid. Let's go to Spain." And so we planned the next year, and he and I took a week, and he, at his expense, took me, and we went and spent several days in Madrid, and we spent about 3 days in the Prado mostly, and we stood in front of that painting together. And it was this great moment where I got to share this experience, and he got to kind of make due on a vow he'd made to himself, I think, a long time ago, that he wanted to repay me for a lot of things that we had shared together. And this was a great moment to do it on my celebration of me entering the 60s in my life, and that he and I were going to go to this and stand in front of this magnificent painting and go drink and eat and talk about art and things like that. And it was a great time. It was really one of the greatest presents I've ever had in my life, to have a student say, "You meant something, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to go have a trip together and stand in front of something that means something to both of us." And not bad.
Wow, that is very moving.
Yeah, it was. It was just terrific. I mean, and of course we still have this. We have this great relationship where he teaches a class, and I'll go out and paint with his students, and I get to be the old guy. It's kind of nice. But it is a joy. I mean, it's not. It's pretty terrific when a student comes through the door and that I haven't seen in years, and say, "You meant something to me," or "What you said helped." Actually, there was recently a young fellow who took one of my artistic problems classes in the 80s, who's a big deal in Microsoft now, and he just was visiting campus in the last couple of months ago, and the president was squiring him around, and he said, "I want to go see Professor Berry because of this, that, and the other." And he told me that there were some aspects of that class that he uses in his work now, and he gave a talk to one of the, I think.
Well, one of the fraternities, I thought, but somebody else as well?
No, it wasn't. It was a class over in the computer science
Oh, yeah.
thing. And they were saying, and the students were saying, well, what was the class that really helped over here? And he says, actually, none of them. It says the best class was Professor Barry's class. You know? He says, that's the one I've used more than any. And everybody's going, oh, God, you know.
Well, with that creative problem solving, that's what
Yeah,
Microsoft sure needs.
Yeah. He's their cloud guy.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of neat. But the thing he was really proud to tell me was that he had set up a woodworking shop in his basement. And then when he wasn't doing things, he would be down in the wood where he would be making things in wood. And I just thought, I said, yeah, good for you, you know. It was really sweet. But those things happen to you, you know. They come back, and I think I'm at an age where a lot of those folks that have they've really made their life. They've become whatever they are, whatever they need to be. And sometimes they come back and say thank you, and it's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it sort of vindicates all that. You know, you're always wondering whether something you say is right or is appropriate and will work for them. That it's of some value. Those things that you think are valuable, and you hope that somebody will carry it and make it theirs. You know, interpret it their way. And yeah, but it's hard to beat that trip to Spain.
Mm.
Good food too.
Joe, any special? We're going to talk in a little bit with James Murray about A Christmas Carol, but
Sure. Sure.
are there any connections with that?
No, I think, I mean, I remember my first visit here. It was we were on college was on spring break. The trees were flowering, and there was an outbreak of measles.
Oh, no.
So a lot of students were being sort of isolated and staying on. But I was walking with Buster Ward around the campus and just sort of, I don't know how to explain it. It just felt like this was where I was supposed to be. And that feeling has never really diminished. And I think part of it is this atmosphere. As I say, Ray's talked about it, and it's been kind of nurtured that, you know, this is where you can kind of do what you want to do. You're not living up to somebody else's expectations. You're creating opportunities for students, and incidentally, in the process, you have opportunities for yourself. I mean, I really probably spread my wings intellectually, artistically, more here than any other place, even though University of Virginia, kind of the big dog, and I did get my MFA from there as well as teach there, and Colorado College, where I took my undergraduate degree. Formative, good education, all those things, but really for the opportunities for personal growth have been greater here, because there's kind of an open atmosphere, feeling of comfort. You're not trying to jump through hoops, but you're finding your own way and seeing it reflected in students. Because I've had, other students. I think Barry. What's Barry's last name? Barry.
Carbon Leaf.
Carbon Leaf. Yes. Anyway, they got their start here because we set them up and gave them the chance to practice in what was then a linoleum floor of Blackwell Auditorium, and they formed the group there. And one of our students that we have in common, Josh, is he never finished here, but he went on. He's now playing a small role in a little recurring series in television, Carrie Diaries. And just the occasional student comes back, they become a teacher or something, and kind of say, it's just wonderful to think that you kind of just opened doors and let them wander around and do stuff. Even kids who didn't stay in the arts, or we have another one who's sort of carving out a little niche for himself in small independent films in Los Angeles, and a couple are off in Chicago doing things, and one is teaching creative writing in Louisiana, and we're working in a theater here or there, someplace else, but it's the feeling. I used to think, I want to make a difference, and I think the phrase has become sort of shop-worn and cheap. Everybody says, I want to make a difference. I want to be a difference maker. And you think, really, does that mean anything? But when you see it happening, then you're really kind of especially grateful that you are a teacher in the best sense of that word, a professor in a good sense of that word, and in a place where it can still happen.
Yeah. I would say, just to dovetail that, just to sort of flip it back on Joe a little bit, one of the benefits, of course, I mean, I have I have hundreds of student friends in the world, that people I've taught. Back when I was teaching 6th grade, I still have good friends that were kids that I taught when they were 12. Now they're turning 50. It's kind of great. But the other great benefit of all this is that just spending all these years with Joe as a colleague. Joe's such a great friend, and he and I have such common interests and agreements on so many things, and we're sounding boards for each other, and we cry on each other's shoulders, and we bitch and moan, and it would have been really rather difficult around here sometimes if I didn't have Joe as a friend and as a colleague, because I think we share so many things and appreciate so many of the same things, and it's a great gift to be able to teach in a college anyway, I think, but it's really a boon to have a colleague that you can go have a real conversation with about anything. And Joe's been that for me for many, many years, and I really am pissed off that he's retiring in that respect. But I mean, I know he'll be around. But that's something that he and I share, is that we respect each other and really care for each other, and we've been able to do great things together.
Yeah, I except for the part about being pissed off, I think that sense is absolutely mutual. I mean, it's a great kind of relationship when you can keep fanning each other's fires and have really good conversations about all kinds of things, and share not only the secret is we get to do what we really love to do, and we actually get to make a living at that too, which is kind of astounding. But to have this great banquet of topics that you can talk about and be nourished by, and incidentally also teach some students, or I used to use, deliberately kind of misuse the vocabulary and say, I won't teach you anything, but I'll learn you some stuff, and I think that's the great thing of it. Encouraged by Ray, you have the nourishment you need to be able to help students learn stuff, and I'm getting circular now, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it's been really fascinating to hear you all talk and share memories, and the real special relationship you have really has come through, and I appreciate your sharing that so openly. I think you both really expressed a lot of freedom you had at Randolph-Macon to do the things that you're gifted in, to share those gifts. And any final thoughts?
Nope.
Nope.
Well, thank you for sharing them here today.
Okay.
Thank you.